Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy,
where we're expanding the conversation around Catholic sexuality.
We're your hosts, Ellen and Kathleen. All right, welcome back to another Charting Toward Intimacy episode. I'm Ellen.
I'm Kathleen.
And today we're talking about selfishness and NFP, if NFP can be used selfishly.
Yeah.
Ooh. Before we get started with this week's episode, I want to tell you about one of our partners, TempDrop. TempDrop is a wearable basal body thermometer that calculates your basal temperature overnight without you needing to wake up at the same time every day to take your temp. Kathleen and I both use TempDrops, and we love how clear of a temperature pattern that they give us. You can use the code Charting Toward Intimacy for 10% off. And when you purchase products through any of our partners, you are supporting this podcast and allowing us to continue providing quality episodes to you. So we really appreciate it when you purchase using our affiliate links. Click the link in the bio to get 10% off of TempDrop. Okay, so can NFP be used selfishly? Well, we want to start by talking about what prompted this episode. There's a term that gets thrown out a lot, the term contraceptive mentality. There's this battle of semantics with this term. There are camps that say, contraceptive mentality, you can have a contraceptive mentality using NFP. And then there are camps that say, you can't have a contraceptive mentality using NFP because NFP isn't contraceptive. And that's true. NFP is not contraceptive in nature. Absolutely. Yeah. But here's the thing. This is like a battle of semantics, and it's kind of ridiculous, honestly, how much we fight this term, and we're confusing everybody. So what we're going to talk about in this episode is we're actually going to answer the underlying question behind that term. And the underlying question is, can NFP be used selfishly? So we're not even really going to talk about that term.
We're not going to talk about what it means. We're not going to talk about where it came from. It's just, the term is the term. It's out there. But there is an underlying question.
Yeah, let's please stop.
That needs to be
confusing
clarified.
People. Yeah. Because when you say, NFP can't be used with a contraceptive mentality, then it's kind of confusing. Can NFP be used selfishly? So, here's the thing. It's yes and no, depending on, again, semantics, like how you define NFP.
Right.
So we still have a semantics war.
Obviously, we're just going to be really clear, right?
So yeah,
yes and no.
We want to clarify it. Okay. So here's the thing. How you define NFP actually does kind of matter in answering this question. And here's why.
Absolutely.
So we define NFP on this podcast as, and I think a lot of people kind of in this space have adopted this definition of NFP is using a fertility awareness-based method alongside prayer and discernment to plan your family. So, NFP is responsible parenthood. It's that if you go back to, there's an episode called Responsible Parenthood, where we talk about how really we should be using responsible parenthood instead of the term NFP, but we have to use the term NFP because nobody knows what we're talking about when we say responsible parenthood.
Right. Yeah.
So if you are praying, discerning, discussing at all times, if this is a constant conversation, constantly in your prayer life, you're, regularly sitting down for deep prayer. You're also just allowing it to be out there, in your brain throughout the day, within your marriage, within your conversations. If you are truly going through a discernment process while you're using a fertility awareness-based method, it would be pretty much impossible for NFP to be used selfishly.
Unless you're discerning and just choosing to not listen. That could be.
That would be, the way that you could use it selfishly. But
correct. But
if you're always listening to God's guidance and you are intentionally trying to follow it, even when it's hard, even when it's it's not possible for me to have another kid right now. Like, right. But you're like, oh, it sounds like God is telling me this, right? If you are trying your darndest to follow God's will, it'd be pretty much impossible to use NFP selfishly.
And here's the thing. If you're taking the time and the effort to constantly discern and remain in communication with God and ask his guidance through it all, you're probably not the person that's going to not listen to what you hear. Right. Like, even when it is hard, right? Like if you're taking the effort and the time.
I don't know though, Kathleen, man, it's hard. It's hard. I mean,
sometimes listen, God asks a lot of us sometimes, but he also asked himself to go to the cross. So, you know, like you
can do hard things.
We can do hard things. Oh my gosh. We can do really hard things.
Yeah.
With the encouragement of the Holy Spirit.
So then another question that comes out of this, then the one that we're really going to talk about today, is can fertility awareness be used selfishly? Yes.
100%.
I am so tired of hearing that fertility awareness can't be used selfishly. All right. Here's the thing. Here's a couple of things.
Soapbox.
In Humana Vitae, Pope Paul VI spelled out, look, if you're practicing responsible parenthood, you need to take these 4 things into consideration: social, economic, physiological, and I'm missing one. Psychological.
Psychological, yeah.
That one's important too. That's one I always forget.
It's like the most
probably
important. Common one.
You have to take those into consideration.
Seriously.
If you don't, you're not practicing responsible parenthood. Because he gave us reasons to avoid pregnancy and like practice responsible parenthood to postpone pregnancy, we know that it can be used wrongly, right? And I'll dig into that a little bit more. Like, if there was no possible way of it being used selfishly, and I'll give the example that I hear all the time is, like if your intention isn't rooted in a good enough reason, like there's a self-selecting nature to fertility awareness, and like you and your spouse just won't be able to keep your hands off each other. That's might be true for some couples. And giving the benefit of the doubt to the people who say that, like it might be true for their relationship. Like the people who are, I hear this and on Instagram and different podcasts and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, that might actually be true for you, but I can tell you straight up, that is not true for my spouse and I. And it's not true for Kathleen.
Nope.
Because Kathleen and I talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
I'm not just trying to speak for her. We have a different relationship with sex. Kathleen and I are still on the journey of trying to heal our relationship with sex. Kathleen and I also like deal with relatively low sex drives and low levels of desire. And we really struggle in those ways. And we try to find ways to increase that desire and, get excited about sex and things like that.
And husbands who take it personally sometimes. We're dealing with that too.
Right? So. We're there with you if you're listening.
We are there.
This is where we're at. And in all honesty, I could probably just not have sex for a year and it wouldn't even faze me. And I just realized I blurted that out on this podcast.
Well, it would. I think it would faze you in terms of your relationship. It would faze you.
True.
Right? You don't feel the physical need to have sex. Like you could go a whole year without feeling the physical need to have sex. But if you went like more than a couple weeks, you'd start to be like, wait a minute. Because know how your how your husband feels and how You might be taking it personally, and it would phase you in that emotional sense, but not in a physical sense.
Exactly. Yeah. And maybe this is a conversation for another podcast because I want to bring us back to selfishness. But basically, I'm just trying to lay out like, look, there are people that exist that NFP is not self-selecting, or fertility awareness is not self-selecting.
Yeah.
Kathleen and I are two people. Maybe we're the only two people, but I'm pretty sure we're not. Pretty sure. Right. So Pope Paul VI laid out, look, you need to consider these reasons. And because he gave us those reasons, we know like it's not just, hey, this is fine to use, right? If it was self-selecting in that way, if it did have that, then his encyclical would have been written very differently. Like Humana Vitae would have been written very differently. It would have been like, look, everybody sign up for a fertility awareness course. Check the box. You're done. You don't need to pray about it. You don't need to, you don't need to do anything. Like just, it's good to go. Yeah. And like here, look at what that mentality does. If using fertility awareness is self-selecting, then that's like, you don't have to pray about it.
Yeah. And
that's really wrong. Like you need to pray about everything at all times, right?
Everything, especially in relation to your vocation.
And so we have to be so careful.
Yeah.
Those of us who are like in this space talking about these very like difficult topics and very intimate topics that like, we need to make sure I'm always trying to be very aware of like how I am teaching something, how I'm explaining something, because I, as a teacher, as an instructor of, people, I'm going to be judged a lot more harshly in the final judgment than someone who isn't teaching it. They're like, that's in the Bible. I can't tell you the quote.
So true.
I can't remember where it is, but
millstones, right? Millstones.
And so, I mean, this is sort of a call to anybody out there who's in like a position of authority or influence in the realm of NFP, fertility awareness, marital intimacy, is please be careful what you're saying, because I mean, it's important that we don't lead people astray.
Right.
So anyway, I think I'll jump off my soapbox and let you talk, Kathleen.
No, I mean, I think these are all really good points. I think we should maybe go into a little bit of like the practicals, like how can this be used selfishly, right? Or what are some reasons that, there's never really a good reason, but like, what are some reasons people say that, or ways that they use it selfishly, right? First of all, that we have to be careful even when researching NFP methods and fertility awareness-based methods, because in their very definition, there is a difference, right? And that fertility awareness-based methods allow for use of barrier methods during your fertile, and they will teach and encourage.
Yeah, certain instructors, like certain secular, or I even know like Christian instructors who will like recommend, use of condoms during the fertile window. There are methods that recommend that way. Now, the methods that we mention on this podcast, never in their instructional materials do they recommend condom use, but there are instructors that teach these methods that might teach that way. So that's why it's important to make sure that you are one, getting like a solid method, but then also two, getting a solid instructor in that method. You just have to be careful.
Yeah, you really do, because it can get confusing, right? But yeah, so that would be one way that we practice fertility awareness selfishly, right? And I'm saying fertility awareness because, again, we're defining NFP as the use of fertility awareness plus prayer and discernment, right?
Are you saying that like using contraceptives is selfish? Is that what you're saying? Because absolutely. Like using condoms during the fertile window, 100% selfish.
Correct.
Okay,
100% selfish. Yeah. Sorry if that wasn't clear.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Barrier methods during your fertile phase, 100% selfish.
100% selfish. Okay.
Trying to have your cake and eat it too. Yeah. But also I think that as Catholics, we are not exempt from this next point. I think that there are a lot of times where we kind of consider, our family planning, our original family planning goals, right? That we've once had. So we'll say, oh, I've always wanted to have 3 kids, no more, no less, right? And sometimes that gets really stuck in our heads. Like if it's something you've envisioned since like high school, right? Or like long before you were married, you're like, no, 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 I only want 3 kids. Like I've only wanted 3 kids. And then all of a sudden you've got your 3. And now you're like, no, I don't. We can really close ourselves off to that without really listening to the promptings of the Holy Spirit sometimes to be like, hey, maybe one more, like maybe one. And maybe the Holy Spirit's not, like this isn't something that says like you need to have a big family. We talk about this a lot, right? Like the size of your family does not equate to your holiness.
Kathleen and I were just looking at a study about fertility awareness and NFP, and like the major and like Catholic users of
it didn't even say Catholic, did it? I think it was the effects of NFP on relationships and sexual satisfaction. It was a study from 2017. It is on the National Institute of Health's website.
Yeah, look it up. But the majority of the users, like the vast majority, there were only 3 users who had more than 5 kids.
The point here is not to say that you have to have as many children as you're physically capable of having, right? Like God has a calling for your family. He has a calling for the size of your family. He has a plan for all of it. And our job is to listen to that. But sometimes we can get so stuck in our heads as to no, it was always my plan to have this many kids, and I really can't see myself going beyond that, right? I can't tell you how many people I know who I've seen them have a baby and be like, this is the perfect, like ending to our family here. Like, right. Like the perfect final piece to our family. And it's like,
I've met so many families like that too.
How do you know that?
Who have like a bonus baby, unexpected pregnancy, and and sometimes there's like a big gap too between like the older kids and like bonus baby. And they're like, this baby is perfect. This is exactly what our family needed. This is, it helps XYZ kids so much. And this child is such a joy. And, and it's like, okay, first of all, before we like go too far in that, like children are not supposed to complete your family. Like,
right. Exactly.
Children are not for you. They're for God.
Right.
But there's so many graces and blessings from additional children that I think sometimes are like very unexpected. And so it's beautiful to see those graces like come out in families.
100%. And maybe, there are families who like for maybe very physical or, health reasons or something, they really can't have any more children beyond what they've had. I know families like that. Right. That it is a definitive statement that our family is done growing. I mean, maybe through adoption, it could still grow, but maybe you're not called to that, right?
With God, nothing is impossible, right? Like, yes, you have a medical condition that doesn't allow this. Like, it's not impossible for God to completely heal that medical condition. It's not.
I mean, true. Yeah.
It's truly not. It's probably not going to happen. But like, it's basically what we're trying to say is with NFP use, with using, practicing responsible parenthood, you always, even past menopause, always remain open in a sense to the fact that like God is the final word in your family size. And yes, he gives us the ability to cooperate with him and try to avoid pregnancy or achieve pregnancy at certain times. But there is always this level of openness to life that we have, that it's like, your husband isn't going to get a vasectomy. You're not going to draw this hard line in the sand of we're done having kids. It's okay right now in this moment right now. And that's the thing too with discernment is the only moment that matters is this one right now.
Yes.
In this moment right now, we don't feel called to have kids. And we're pretty sure also that in all the future moments, we're not called to have more kids, right?
Right.
But the only moment that matters is this moment right here.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I mean, and it's so true. Okay. And one last thing that I wanted to mention in regards to this whole topic is for people like Ellen and I, right, which we have just admitted
low desires
tend to be low desire, right?
We're working on our desire.
Exactly. It can be very easy to deprive your marriage and your marriage bond simply because you don't want to end up pregnant.
Or fear. I think fear.
I think the fear. Exactly. The
like
fear.
You fear getting pregnant. And it can be really easy to deprive your marriage.
Yes. And it's not necessarily that you have any real good reason to like fear being pregnant. It's just that you don't want to be. Like, and that's honestly where, I mean, Ellen, I think you're probably in the same boat. But for me, like, my mental health is something that I do need to, that's my typical good reason, right? Like, I get very overwhelmed. Yeah. I'm pretty sure I've like undiagnosed ADHD, and like, it's just managing life with 5 kids right now has been really, really difficult. And I can't imagine having another baby at this moment, right? So that's my good reason. But we don't really ever have a reason beyond that, right? Like, I always need to wait until I feel mentally ready, like I'm caught up, I'm doing well with my other kids, right? Like, I'm not depriving them of any emotional connection, or, you know, I'm raising them in the faith. I'm doing all these good things. Though once I am there, I have no good reason to avoid having any more children, really.
You know, and what's weird is I actually feel like I'm in a different spot than that, because I would totally agree between 1 and 2 of my kids. Yeah. That was exactly, it was like, we kind of got to the, like, she turned a year old, and I was like out of this like fog of postpartum depression and like starting to feel good and that kind of stuff. And it was like, yeah, we don't have any good reason to avoid pregnancy. Now we're sort of, it's odd to me. I feel very at peace about the fact that we are avoiding pregnancy, which is a very good indication for discernment, is following the peace. And it's for completely different reasons than like health and wellness and like mental capacity. Cause I feel in a lot of ways that like I could handle another kid. But like, we're avoiding for a completely different reason. And it's odd. It's odd to me.
But it is, I mean, it just goes to show like you can't, like, this isn't a black and white situation, right? Like, everything is so unique to every family. But I will say that when I get to that place where mentally I'm pretty good, I'm handling what I have in front of me on my plate right now really well. I realize, hey, maybe we should think about we should open ourselves up to the possibility of having another, right? It's not like, oh, maybe we should try for another. It's maybe we should open ourselves up to it.
Sure.
I always get this fear of pregnancy again. And it's not really a fear, but it's like, it's an aversion. Like, do I want to go through all this again? Like, I carry big babies. My body is tired. I am almost 35 years old. I turned 35 this week that this is airing, turning 35. Like, I am tired, right? And so it's always this like, yeah, I really just don't want to go through it again, right? That's what ends up seeping into my mind. And so I am always tempted to continue avoiding. Now, my husband is someone who experiences love primarily through physical touch, right? So if I am in that place where it's like, I'm just avoiding for no really good reason, I am then depriving my husband of the way he feels most loved, right? And like, that's something we really have to consider as well. Like, this is, there is a procreative aspect, but there is a unitive aspect to sex. And it's so important. We have to remember that. And it's so easy, again, for low desire people to forget like us, to forget sometimes that, like, no, like, I need to feed my marriage, right? Like, my marriage needs this intimacy, regardless of, and I say to people all the time, and I'm pretty sure I've said it on here a whole bunch, sometimes your marriage needs intimacy more than you need to not get pregnant.
Yep.
And it's a hard reality to face when we don't necessarily want to be pregnant. But it's a reality all the same. Like, we always have to remember that our vocations are designed for holiness, and holiness comes through the cross, right? And this isn't necessarily, I'm talking about the cross of having sex with your spouse. I'm talking about the cross of like the literal burden of pregnancy.
Yeah.
Right? Like that is a cross.
Another child and a newborn and
exactly. All the things.
Labor and delivery and the economics of another mouth to feed. And, these are all crosses.
College tuition down the line, right?
Yeah, right.
Like, it's like everything, right? But we have to remember in all of this that our marriages are not meant to be self-serving. They are, I mean, other-centered, really,
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's kind of all I really had to round this topic out. I don't know if you have any more.
That's pretty much it. We mentioned like some ways, like some really common selfish ways, and we didn't, there's a lot of other ways to selfishly practice like fertility awareness that
this is not an exhaustive list.
Yeah, it's not an exhaustive list. And then also the reason why we aren't going to go into like that other category of reasons is because that's really dependent on the couple, the category of finances, the category of, space in the house or, those kind of things. That's so personal.
Yeah.
So dependent on you, your spouse, and your family that like we can't give. I mean, there's a reason that the church doesn't have like a list of, acceptable reasons to avoid pregnancy or reasons that are considered selfish. Like there's a reason that doesn't exist. But what Kathleen mentioned, like those couple of, I think there were like kind of 3 different buckets of pretty common ways that fertility awareness can be practiced selfishly. And so it's just important to take some time to like maybe even go back, look at what those 3 things are and like pray about them, chat with your husband about them. Yeah. Or if you're the man listening, like chat with your wife about them. And just, kind of take stock of where you're at. And it's very important. And this is a hard call, but it's very important that we don't practice NFP selfishly. Yeah. Because we're missing the mark when we do that. And missing the mark is sin, right? Like, a lot of times we think of sin as, oh, I have like actively committed a wrong, I have not followed the rules or whatever. But what sin truly is missing the mark. We missed the mark in our journey toward God. And so, sinning can be like even just not understanding something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would also just like to say that there is such a beautiful freedom in knowing that there is a divine plan that we can be guided towards and follow. It's very freeing to know and realize that it's not all up to you and it's not all dependent on you.
Absolutely.
If you have those reasons that you feel like you can't have another child right now, but God is asking you to, you can know and trust that he's going to make a way. He's going to provide what you need, all of those fears and reservations that you have, thinking you maybe can't do it. If God is asking you to do it, he's going to give you the resources to do it. Which I have always found beautiful and comforting. Yeah.
So as we close out this episode, if you've listened this far, you're clearly one of our, what am I trying to say? You're a dedicated listener. But for the month of May, we are going to be intentionally asking our mother to for certain intentions having to do with NFP, fertility awareness, and each
women's
week,
health.
Yeah, women's health. We're going to have a different prayer intention, and we're going to have a specific prayer that's written, and we're going to we're asking our listeners to pray that prayer at least once in the week. And if you can, like, bring that intention to mass with you, either like Sunday mass that week or a daily mass. And we're going to spend the month of May really asking our mother to make some changes in this space, because there's a lot. Mm-hmm. So look out for that next week for that prayer intention, and that prayer. Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.